Seminary. So today's presenter is Sunčica. Am I right? Yes, I get it. Pronunciation. I'm sorry, it's kind of weird to pronounce the name for us. But anyway, so she's a research visitor in the institute. So whenever you have any comment or question, even without or even after the presentation, you can find her in Hannah's room. Yeah. Otherwise, on this room. I'd love to listen to the other presentation.
Well, hello everyone. Thanks again for staging me for the second time in less than 3 weeks. So maybe to introduce myself, so indeed I'm currently visiting Anna, who is actually in London. There is a reason why I'm visiting Anna, so we do have joint projects together, but everything that we work on together, she told me she presented to this crowd. So she said, you cannot present those things. So we worked on the paper on the first in family to graduate and the fertility outcomes, and the other paper is exploiting this school leaving age reform in Hungary, which reduced compulsory school leaving age and labor market outcomes. So I think she presented both of these papers last year. In terms of just a little bit of my connection with Hungary, it's not just through Anna. I did my master at the Central European University. I had some stellar colleagues at the time. So my cohort was Adam Seidel, Miklos Koren, Martin Kachanec. So, I have peers to look up to. So I know that Hungarian colleagues are all stellar from my perspective. So I did my master at the CU. I graduated in 2000. Then I went and did my PhD at the university, at the Vrije Universiteit in Amsterdam. And I was there until 2009, I think. And then I moved to Bath. So I was in Bath 2011, 2014, I was working there as a lecturer, and hence I'm still collaborating with people in Bath like Joanna, Clifton-Sprigg, and Jonathan James. And I love Bath, so if anyone wants to visit Bath, I can put you in touch with people there. And then I moved to Antwerp, where I'm currently based. So I'm already at the University of Antwerp for 10 years now. But as you can see, I keep all my affiliations. If you affiliate with the institute, I will just add it and I will keep it as long as I can. Okay, so that's my introduction. So my research is mostly about applied labor economics, focusing on education, crime, fertility outcomes, gender pay and pension gaps. So this is something pretty new for me as well. So the paper is work in progress. It's a joint work with Joanna, who is in Bath, and Ines, who is our joint PhD student based in Antwerp. And this is basically one chapter of Ines' PhD thesis. And it's pretty much work in progress. So we're exploiting the exposure to the refugee inflow from Ukraine in Poland. You might have guessed, Joanna is Polish. So she's somehow that's how the collaboration started. Okay, so this is my outline. So I will briefly motivate the talk, although I guess it doesn't need a lot of motivation. So we are witnessing quite large migrant flows throughout the world, and particularly refugee crisis with ongoing wars. So we had the Syrian refugee crisis, then we had Ukrainian refugee crisis, and now we have yet another war, new war, which is probably also creating a lot of refugees. So these inflow refugees might have a very broad, not just economic, but also social and political implications for the receiving countries. And it might affect natives in different ways. So it might affect native labor market outcomes, it might affect natives other type of economic outcomes, but it might also affect how people vote. It might even affect through interaction with natives. There's literature that shows that this might also change public policies for good, etc. So the research question that we pose is, does exposure to refugees affect natives' electoral outcomes? And we use as a case study the Ukrainian refugee inflow in Poland in the aftermath of the Russian-Ukrainian war. And what we are in particularly we're looking at outcomes on the parliamentary elections that took place in October 2023 and compare it to previous elections. So that's the motivation. So the natural experiment that we tried to exploit is basically this sudden Russian invasion of Ukraine in February 24, 2022, which basically triggered a very substantial and unexpected outflow of Ukrainian refugees, since Poland basically received one of the largest inflow of Ukrainian refugees. And because of the European directive to kind of proactively basically accept refugees from Ukraine throughout Europe, this was also a reaction of Poland. So they got immediately the ID number. They had access to labor market, education, health, care, and for a period of time, families that hosted Ukrainian migrants even got some subsidy from the government. So there was quite a lot of movement from Ukraine to Poland and back, but at the end, the settled number is about 1 million Ukrainian refugees settled in Poland. In comparison to previous refugee crises like the Syrian, not young men, they were mostly women and children who are either joining their partners who already worked in Ukraine, or who basically left their partners back, who already worked in Poland, or who left their partners back in Ukraine. It's hard to use this flow to try to say anything about the causal effects of the inflow on any outcomes, not just political outcomes, because you can imagine that this allocation or this kind of spread of refugees in a country is not random. So people might be motivated by different economic and social factors why they locate in certain areas. So we can't, and the distribution of these refugees was not random. So what we are looking, we were looking at historical events. So we tried to instrument this inflow and the location of Ukrainian refugees in Poland with historical location of Ukrainians in Poland. That is, we are using the 1947 basically forced migration of Ukrainians to Polish territories. And we are using this kind of shift share instrument to predict the location of the current Ukrainian refugees. And I will spend more time on this instrument. So in the preview of the results, so what we find is that in the aftermath of this Ukrainian influx, there seems to be polarization in votes. So the votes basically went, there was an increase in both right-wing and left-wing voting. So it seems to be a polarization in the electoral results, and there is some literature which is also showing this in other contexts.
So when you say left wing, do you include the current governing bloc, or the left?
We look at them separately.
So is it just an anti-incumbent vote, or?
No, we try to group. So because from what I understood, there was a lot of movement in political parties over the years. They're mostly switching from right and center right. And there is this one party which is constantly gaining majority of the votes and doesn't need to form coalitions with others. So we are looking at them separately, and then we are grouping other parties. Yeah, we are grouping.
Unfamiliar.
Yeah, I've seen that, but it's law and
Law and Justice.
Yeah, Law and Justice indeed. So because there's a Polish name and then there's a translation. So we are looking at Law and Justice separately. And then we are doing the grouping of other political parties into left, far right, right, center right, and others.
Okay, so what you see is that basically votes move away from the center,
Yeah, so most,
either to the
yes,
far right or to the
yes, so we see a reduction in the
even if
voting
you
for the
don't count
incumbent.
law and justice, so taking out law and justice
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
among the opposition.
So there is reduction
Yeah.
for law and justice, but there is increase for these more extreme right parties and left parties.
And also a reduction in the center right opposition.
They are mostly, we are looking at them as a coalition, so yes, for them, there's also a reduction.
Sorry.
That's,
Are you gonna talk about how you actually categorize the parties? I mean. whether-
no, I won't spend time on that because this is what Joanna did and she basically, I won't talk about that, but basically we have these general groupings and then she tried to, because these parties are changing over time, they're forming different coalitions over time and it's quite complicated.
This is actually what I'm asking. So do you know anything about actually, so because these groupings are based on typically on you know, long-term ideas of where one party is and where the other is, and the agendas are actually changing.
Yeah. Yeah,
Right? So a far right party can move into the right, while changing agenda, but still considered far right in the eyes of many, because that party was always a far right. And so I'm just sort of in a limbo whether your question makes much more sense whether when you look at the agenda of parties and not actually this far right or left right thing, but how people actually voting differently on different agendas.
okay.
In particular, how they deal with this war, like Russian friendly or not. Do you investigate that?
No, no, but
In Poland, the Russian.
yeah, but I mean,
I understand, but there can be some, you know.
we are framing that,
scales.
you will see, I will mention one paper for Hungary, by your colleague, one of the co-authors is Adam. Which is also, which is also looking at, the attitudes, the change of attitudes in Hungary towards Ukrainian refugees. And you have a similar setting, you have a country which is not very much open to migrants, especially not to migrants of different, cultural backgrounds. Like, you know, was open, so a lot of these parties were openly against. So basically law and justice, when they were pitching for, you know, in the previous elections, they were openly against accepting refugees from Syria, and this gains a lot of populist votes. So you have a country which doesn't have a lot of experience or doesn't have a lot of refugees, like during the Syrian crisis, there was about 1,000 refugees hosted in Poland, which is openly against refugees from these different cultural backgrounds, and yet it's very much kind of welcoming refugees from Ukraine. And I think a similar situation has happened in Hungary.
Let's say Hungary was a minority that I know, and that's can make a difference. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know whether Poland is the same. Do they have also minority in Ukraine? That
Yeah,
part of the
Yes.
refugees?
so that this historic setting is what we are trying to what we will try to explore. So
A very basic question, I should probably know that, is there a language barrier, so how similar is the Ukrainian and the Polish language?
well, I would say, I mean, I come from Serbia, and I would say, I mean, I don't speak Russian, but I would say that you could understand some things, but the alphabet is different. I think, you know, there are some common words, like dobry den. That's how much I know. So it's basically the same across the board. It's not like, you know, it's very different. So this is very similar, but still the alphabet is Latin versus Cyrillic. So I would say language wise, it's just that if they all had to learn Russian, it might be a common denominator in the past, but that's also, you can see Russia as also the common enemy in a sense that makes them more closer to each other. So in terms of the previous literature, so this comes from sociology theory. So how would what would be the reaction to let's say out group by the in group. So you have two options. You have either positive effect. The effect might be positive, coming from contact and sustained interactions, and this might reduce prejudice and discrimination toward these minority members. And maybe I give here, I like this example, but I don't know whether, so this example of Mohamed Salah, so he's a football player in Liverpool, football club of Muslim origin, but basically the supporters of Liverpool have become much less, so to say, racist, because they have now Mohamed Salah as a someone they can identify with, because he's a good football player and happens to be of a Muslim origin. And there is this really nice paper that is using scraping Twitter data and showing how Liverpool supporters are commit much less these online hate crimes, since Mohamed Salah they have interaction in a way with this football player. And then on the other hand, you have conflict or group threat theory, which this influx of these migrants or refugees might actually lead to worsening attitudes towards migrants due to power dynamics, competition, and conflict over scarce resources. I didn't understand. And there will be literature that shows both. So if we now move to let's say economic literature that is using different settings to and the type of shift share instrument that we are using to show what is the effect of an migrant or refugee influx on political outcomes, you have very mixed evidence. You have both support for far right parties, and you also have a reduction for right parties. And the explanation can be that it's very different whether you actually get in contact. So whether you have this intergroup contact type of theory, so whether you actually get in contact, not just be exposed, but be kind of in contact with these immigrants, or so basically contact versus exposure. And there is, so what I list here is the literature that is using this type of instrumental variables approach, but it's this first set of papers is basically benefiting from the random refugee assignment. And for example, this is the recent paper for Italy, where they exploit the random assignment of Syrian refugees in Italy. And then you have these other papers which are using this type of shift share IB based on some historical events, let's say immigrant inflows, refugee inflows, or availability of group accommodations, distance to the border, stock of rental housing. And then what is interesting, because the findings go both ways, what is interesting is, let's say, paper of Steinmeier for Austria, which shows that in the upper Austria, in the north part of Austria, so during the Syrian refugee crisis, areas where refugees settled in these group accommodations, which became available from schools or old people's homes. So basically, these areas had a reduction in vote for right-wing parties, whereas in upper areas which only experienced Syrian refugees who were passing through along the Balkan route, were passing through from Serbia to Hungary, Austria, going to Germany, basically in those areas which were just exposed but not really had contact with these refugees, there was an increase in right voting. And there is a very nice paper by Becker and Ferrara, which is a kind of a summary overview of different literature and different outcomes, not just political outcomes, but also labor market outcomes, looking at the consequences of forced migration, not just for the receiving countries, but also for the sending countries along the range of outcomes. So if you want to get abreast of this literature by 2019, I think this paper provides a very nice summary. Okay, so where do we want to see our contribution? So in comparison to this previous literature, we are basically focusing on a very recent refugee shock, which hasn't been much explored in the literature. And in terms of the size of the shock, I touched something I shouldn't. In terms of the size of the shock, so this is a graph based on a paper, but which was then published in The Economist. You can see that the refugee influx from Ukraine was one of the largest one-time shocks. So in total, you had more refugees from Syria over the period, but in terms of one-time shock, this is one of the largest influx of refugees in comparison to previous events. Then we are looking at the country which has a pretty homogeneous population and it's openly anti-immigrant, as I was saying. So it's the first experience with such a large mass-scale refugee inflow. Then we have a situation that so in Austria it was basically people were being confronted or had to encounter refugees from very different cultural backgrounds. Now you have refugees from culturally and historically similar backgrounds. In the literature, this is also known as a refugee hypocrisy. And this paper by Pepinski et al., which is for Hungary. So Adam Reif is one of the co-authors, also talking about this refugee hypocrisy in the context of Hungary. And there is a perception of a common enemy. So if you think of implications, if you think of policies, it's you need to take into account that this we need to think how broader implications are, because whether the results would be the same if you had culturally different refugees, probably not, or whether this contact versus exposure would be more important. And this is also what Pepinski and et al. Are discussing at the end of the paper. So what would, whether the response of Hungarian people to Ukrainian refugee was the same for, let's say, Ukrainian Roma refugees in comparison to non-Roma, but this is something which they cannot see. And then we try to have the identification, which is due to Poland's history of forced population relocation. So this is what we try to pitch the story. Okay, so now a bit about Polish setting. So my apartment in Budapest is like 400 meters from Polish embassy, completely random, but now I keep being exposed on a daily basis to Polish setting. And so this is an overview of the events from 1945 to present day. And basically what is important, so in the sake of time, I won't spend, I try to be brief. So basically after the Second World War in 1945, what happened is that Poland had shifted borders. So I have these shifts on the maps on the next slide. So basically Poland got part of these recovered territories, which were in Germany. So they were basically were now part of Poland, and then this part of Poland went to the USSR, and that was as a result of this Potsdam Agreement. So that meant that there was a lot of mixing of populations. So you had basically, although Germans were kind of pushed out to these territories, I mean, here there was a lot of population mixing, and there was an intent to kind of homogenize population on both sides. So to have like kind of switches of Russian and Ukrainians to the USSR and vice versa. Nevertheless, in 1947, there was this operation called Vistula, where about 100,000 Ukrainians, which were in these Western territories, were forcibly moved which were in the eastern territories, were forcibly moved to these recovered west territories. And this is what is being shown on this slide. So basically, you had some kind of forced migration to the eastern and northern part of Poland, and quite a large chunk of these people who were forcefully migrated were Ukrainians. So this is what we are going to use in our setting. We will use this historic share of Ukrainians in this eastern and northern territory to predict the current location of Ukrainian refugees in the aftermath of the Russian-Ukrainian war. So basically, we use the location of these people relocated from the former Soviet Union as a share part of the instrument, and then we interacted with the shift with this large influx of about 1 million Ukrainian refugees in the aftermath of the war. So what happened later on, 80s and up to 2004, when Poland entered the European Union, there was not much in or out migration. In 2004, people mostly emigrated for work when Poland joined the EU. And then we have the 2014 refugee crisis, where, as I discussed, Poland actually did not take a lot of immigrants, and there was pretty large anti-refugee political discourse also in 2015, if you think of the events on the Polish-Belarusian border. But what happened, there was quite a lot of work-related migration. So there was, and there were Ukrainians coming into Poland at the time, mostly on temporary work-related contracts. So there was a lot of work-related migration. And then post 2021, again, Poland is still a net immigration country, mostly through these work-related contracts. Okay, so if we think of now the setting that I already talked about, like what is happening after the Russian invasion, so Poland receives an unexpected inflow of refugees from Ukraine. So if you compare it to other countries, so Poland is here. So it's basically the third receiving country. So obviously a lot of Ukrainian migrants went to Russia, Germany, and about 1 million of Ukrainian refugees settled in Poland. On this graph, we basically look at our, so we have we calculated or created this graph based on the data. So you can see that over time, especially after 2015, this influx of Ukrainian mostly related work-related migrants has been steadily increasing and was about 500,000 in at the moment when the war started. But then you have this large influx, these large jumps of the Ukrainian refugees when the war started. And as I said, they're mostly more than 60%, close to 70% of these refugees are women and children. And so I already talked about the response that they immediately got this ID number, had access to the labor market, education, and health and social benefits. They were hosted either by Polish households or basically by Ukrainian households, people from Ukraine who already lived in Poland. And importantly, in contrast to the 2015 refugee crisis and the ongoing humanitarian crisis on the Polish-Belarusian border, there was much more positive kind of reaction towards Ukrainian refugees and this refugee hypocrisy that I talked about. Okay, so about the political landscape, so just briefly what we already talked about. So the main party is this Law and Justice Party, and they were the incumbents, as you said. And then, as I said, there was a lot of switches over the years, mostly trying to reform coalitions that would kind of gain more votes. In terms of In terms of political settings, so we have basically we have the parliament, we have the lower and the upper senate, and what we are looking at parliamentary elections at the lower senate, at the same. So we are looking at that because the majority of the party that gets majority votes of the same is basically also delegating the prime minister. So there was a lot of movement in party affiliations and grouping between the elections, but basically, if you think about the setting, the change goes from center right to right. So there are no big shifts in the political landscape. So it's not that it goes from right to left, but it's basically from center to center right. And I think this is also happening in other countries. Okay, so what do we do then in terms of data? So we collected quite a lot of data in order to make this story work. So some of these data are readily available, like this 1950 Polish census, and some of the data, like Ukrainian refugees administrative registry, is only available upon buying the data, so paying for the data. So we have this information from the 1950 Polish census, and from this data, we basically know basically the individuals were asked where they lived in 1939. So we can know from this census which individuals were basically relocated or shifted through this forced migration in the after Second World War. And we have disaggregate data by county. So you can think of Poland. Poland has provinces, these voivodeships, about 380, but sorry. It has less of these voivodeships, but it has about 380 counties. Powiat. And for these counties, we only have information on 120 counties. So you will see that even though we have at this more aggregate level, we have data at the more aggregate level, but at the more disaggregated level, at the county level, we only have information for 120 counties in these recovered territories, which I will show in a minute.
I'm lost. So you this 180 territorial counties, they covered all of Poland, or you have missing values in this area?
We have missing values. This is what I'm trying to say a bit not eloquently. And this is what I'm trying to say. So we have data at the more aggregated level, but at the more disaggregated level, at the level of the counties, this COVID, we only have the data for this historical migration for these 120 counties, which are in the western and north part of Poland, or which are in these recovered territories. And we will be doing the analysis on the county level, but for these 120 counties. And you can, I mean, we've been thinking, this is basically the part of work in progress, how to make the results more stronger, and whether there's a way to kind of do something and include also the other parts of Poland. So we have recent Ukrainian immigration from these administrative registries, so at different levels, province and county level. We have this Ukrainian refugee administrative registry. So from here, we have the total number of Ukrainian refugees registered in Poland. So we will use that as a cumulative number in October 2023, when the parliamentary elections took place. We have electoral outcomes for all these different years, but the main results are based on the elections, parliamentary elections in 2023. Again, you could also think that we could maybe do something with the local elections. So at the moment, we haven't done that. And we are looking at the vote share for these political groupings in the same, this lower Senate. And this is what I already talked about, how we try to group them. So we have left, center, right-wing law and justice, so this is the only party that we are looking at apart, not in a coalition or not in groupings with other. Then we have other right-wing and far right, so, and you will see that the results for other right-wing will have even smaller number of observations because these are smaller parties that might not take part in elections every year. So these other categories has less observations and might be even less reliable. And then next to vote share, we also have the election turnout and share of invalid votes. And then finally, we have the socioeconomic and demographic county characteristics, which we use both as controls in some of the regressions, but we also use them as outcomes because we want to see whether this influx of Ukrainian migrants, how it affected, let's say, internal or external migration, how did it affect some kind of labor market characteristics, business creation, and some of the crime outcomes, and whether this would help us build the story. So in terms of descriptive results, so this is this is the map of Poland showing basically the share of Ukrainian immigrants relative to total population over these different years. So this is the 1950 population, which lived in USSR in 1939, so in the aftermath of this forced migration, and you can see that the darker parts are in this western and northern part, the recovered territories. Also, if you look at the province level and if you look at the county level.
What is the scale? I mean, what scale the colors represent? Let's say the darkest color, what is that?
The darkest color is like 46 to 67%.
The total population was more than half of the population of a given region was.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh,
So it's these are quite large percentages. So this is the situation in 2021. So again, you can see that these darker colors remain in the western part, not so much in the northern part. Another dark color appears here where Warsaw is located.
Yeah, so I mean, you say that lived in the EU. No. It sounds suspiciously too high to me, because you said 140,000 Ukrainians were moved to
Well,
the Western
you can
territories.
think one county has the size of the population. So
And that the recovered territories must have, even after the Germans were expelled, they must have had like a couple of million there.
so I think the average is about 3,000 per county, and the county is about 100,000 people.
But that's
So
only.
yeah, so
3%.
that must be smaller.
3%, right?
Okay, yeah,
So this scale is.
yeah, this is too large. Okay, and then if you look at the comparison of 2023 versus 2021, again, you have a similar picture in the western parts of Poland, and there's the concentration around Warsaw. So in maybe one of the robustness checks, we are thinking whether to take Warsaw out just to see what is happening.
So for this, after 2020 refugees, do you observe if they stay there or they move on to other countries, or I didn't totally understand the data construction on these refugee statistics, but so yeah, so my question is that are they included for that was left Poland and then to Germany?
So say it again.
So when you show the statistics for the Ukrainian war, then the refugee ratios, do those include also those refugees who leave Poland afterwards, or do they include only those who stayed in Poland?
So we are looking at the PESEL number, and we are looking at individuals in October 2023, which have a valid PESEL number. So if individuals left after 30 days, they would lose this ID. So basically we are looking at individuals who stayed. So So our calculation is based on the parcel number ID. So those individuals that have these active parcel ID in October 2023. From what my understanding of this previous work-related inflows is that they didn't have necessarily ID, that they were on these temporary work contracts, which is different. So in a way, they are different from these, so their status is different from these current influx. So you could think of when the war started that some of these Ukrainians who were already in Poland might go back, you know, kind of go back to Ukraine and then now come back and try to get a different status, but that would be quite risky because if work-related migration, they were probably mostly men. So going back to Ukraine, you're risking not being able to come back. So maybe there are some switchers, but I don't think that that's a large percentage. So what we are looking at is the influx of the refugees cumulative to October 2023 who had the active parcel ID. So that means that they stayed because, as I said, if they left for more than 30 days, they would lose the ID. So in terms of the regression then that we are trying to estimate, so the dependent variable will be the change in the vote share between 2023 and 2019, and that would also basically this difference would difference out everything that is you could think of time invariant. And then on the right hand side, we also have the Ukrainian inflow, which is basically measured in thousand population, and we are just looking at Ukrainians arriving after February 2022, based on parcel number in county S, and we are looking at 2023 elections. We are controlling for some of the county characteristics, mostly related to socio-demographic characteristics. And we are focusing on these beta 1 coefficients. So because of what I said at the start, so if you would estimate this by OLS, it's very likely that this coefficient would pick up some unobservables because this Ukrainian inflow was not, so the allocation or the relocation of Ukrainians in Poland was not random, so you can think that this beta would be biased by some unobservables. So to deal with this, we are then using this shift share ID approach, where we are instrumenting this Ukrainian inflow by this shift share instrument, which is a product of the war inflow. So basically, this influx of Ukrainian refugees, which we then multiply. So that's the shift part of the instrument, which we then multiply by the share of the Ukrainian population in this western or recovered part of the Polish territories based on the 1950 census. And that's our attempt to identify the effects. So you can think of the total Ukrainian refugee inflow is assigned to Polish counties based on location of historic migrant population. And you can think of the reasons being that people go to areas where they had some kind of networks and existing contacts.
That was 70 years before. I mean, is that still, so your identifying assumption, I guess, is that it's still sort of Ukrainian descendants.
So I can show you some.
70 years is a long time. It's
Yeah.
like 2 or 3 generations.
Let's see if this will work. Okay, I'll go here and then hopefully I will get to those. Okay, I managed. So this is some summary statistics where we are looking at Polish population and the distribution of Polish and Ukrainian population in 1950 and the present time. So what you can see is that they seem to have, so this is So this is the total population in Polish current territories. So this is in millions. And you can see that here 90% stayed where they were. But if you're looking at the recovered territories, you can see that only 20% of people were in these recovered territories, and you can see that there was this shift as a result of this forced migration. And if you're looking at 2021, so you can see that individuals who were born in Ukraine, in the total current Polish territory, there's about 176,000, and 96,000 are still living in those recovered territories. So you can think of that before the war in 2021, you had in current Polish territories 176,000 Ukrainians, and 96,000 are still living in these recovered and Western territories. So, and in terms of the sizes, so basically there's about average per county based on this pastoral legislation. The registration date is about 2,700, and each county is on average 100,000. So this is some evidence that basically these Ukrainians who were relocated to these Western recovered territories, to a majority actually were still there in 2020.
But these are really old, I mean, these are extremely old people.
Yeah.
I mean, these are not the old people, this
Yeah,
is
yeah.
the total Ukrainian.
Yeah.
one. I mean, these are the richer parts of Poland anyway,
True.
apart from Warsaw. So, you know, current Ukrainian immigrants before the war would also more likely move to the west, to the southwest and west, maybe not to the north, I guess. To the north would be.
Yeah, so you're
Perhaps
right,
better.
this western part of Poland is more urban, has better infrastructure, it's also more voting more center left parties, whereas the eastern part of Poland is more rural, less infrastructure, and it's more right wing.
I'm
10
just thinking
minutes.
about the instrument, if I
Yeah.
understand whether,
Yeah, so
anyway.
on the same point, actually, that could it be that actually the same reasons people moved 70 years ago to the same areas as they are moving now, which is irrespective of it. So, you know, more urban areas were there in 1950 as well as in 2022. So, and they are still, you know, so they're not independent from each other.
That's a good comment, but at the time there was nothing there, you know, like you can think of Germans being kicked out, these were like empty territories. So there, you know, there was a lot of empty houses because the Germans who lived there were kicked out and were now populated by Ukrainians. So I don't think that the setting is exactly the same and that we can think of the same reasons.
But your argument is that, you know, or my counter argument would be that if people back then were more, accommodating for immigrants, that cultural capital still could have stayed on 70 years on, and hence people today move to the same areas. So this is, you know, I'm debating the
Yeah.
your instrument.
Yeah, that's a valid point. It's just that the setting is very different. So it's after Second World War, Germans were kicked out. There's many empty houses, and so you don't have the same situation, the same setting. But we could spend more time on this because I think I get this argument a lot. Yes.
And also, I guess, back at that time, these were, you know, families moving there, and now it's more like women with the children, no?
Yeah.
And so can we see the exact numbers? Because you had a table on share of men and women, but I guess you did not mention the proportion of children actually.
Okay, no, I haven't, but that's a good point. Okay, we can add that to the. Okay, so since I have 10 minutes, we check the instrument relevance, we check as much as we can, instrument exogeneity. So we perform some balancing tests, and we show that instrument is conditionally independent. So basically in the regression, we control for these socio-demographic characteristics that turned significant in this balancing test. And the instrument relevance you will see from the first stage. So this is basically the table with the main estimation results. So each column is a different regression where the dependent variable is share between 2023 and 2019 based on these groupings that I mentioned. So you have a far right wing, which is law and justice, center parties, left wing parties, and other minor independent parties.
Wait, this is 5 separate regressions you have here?
Yes, 5 separate regressions. So the sample size is these 120 counties in the Western Territory. So here we have 56 observations because they said these other minor independent parties are not appearing every year and they're not in all the counties. So we have less observations. So we try different, so this is the first stage results.
And the left-hand side is always 1 if, let's say, 4 right parties and 0 for everything else. So it's the
share.
It's a share.
It's a share of votes.
But then, and okay, go on now.
So and then we interpret these as percentage points that basically this Ukrainian inflow increased vote share for far right parties by 3.1 percentage points, increased the vote share for left wing parties by 9.3 percentage points, and reduced the vote share for right wing law and justice party by 5.3 percentage points. So the significance, I mean, we report here different type of p-values because we are trying to correct for, we are trying to report heteroscedasticity, robust standard errors. We are trying to correct for the small sample. So you can, I mean, I highlighted basically the p-value that we think are most believable. And these are the first stage results.
And how different these are from just the normal OLS? So if you don't do the instrumenting.
You can see it here. So we do the normal
Oh.
OLS. We do the normal OLS only for the law and justice. So if you do the normal OLS, you get you don't get significant results. And then this is the IV. So we just did a comparison of the OLS and IV for the law and justice.
Mhm.
So what I said, other results that we look at or other outcomes that we look at, we also look at this voter turnout and valid votes. So we don't find anything for the voter turnout. We see a reduction in the invalid votes and increase in the valid votes. So maybe there is more people also voting in these elections. What do we also look at? So I said we had these socioeconomic outcomes. So we are looking at these other outcomes, and now I know that Anna Adamets likes these type of graphs, where she shows 10,000 regressions in one graph. So my PhD student did the same. So what we are looking at, internal migration, international migration, crime incidences, employment and other measures, registered business entities, local expenditure, local revenues. So, and the only significant results that we see the reduction in job offers. So you can imagine that these Ukrainian inflow, that people joined the labor market, so there was a reduction in job offers. But there seems to be an increase in registered business entities. So there is some effect also on the labor market. Also, there is a reduction in the removed business entities, and this increase in business entities took place in information and communication activities, professional, scientific or technical activities, health or social work activities, real estate and education. So if you're thinking of the broader context, so what did happen, like whether this influx actually affected other spheres of socioeconomic life. So the only significant effects that we find is on basically business creation, and there are less job offers because these people are basically taking jobs and settling down in Ukraine, in Poland. So in terms of robustness checks, we try to do some robustness checks in terms of the first stage results, second stage results. So what we try, because there were other migrants basically from this forced migration. So we want to see whether we find significant results if we have a Belarusian or a German or a British migrant through these historic migrations. So we don't find any significant results. And we also look at if we, let's say, instead of these shares, historic shares, we just look at random shares from the draws from uniform or a normal distribution. So we try to show that the first stage results are kind of stable and are not just a result of, we don't produce them randomly, but there's some working of the instrument. We also look at the previous elections to see whether we will find any significant results if we are looking at vote shares from previous elections using the same setting, and we don't find anything, so that's kind of also reassuring. One suggestion was to use the 2021 distribution of migrants, and this is something that we are still work in progress, because we get similar results if we only focus on these 120 recovered territories. But if we look at the whole of Poland, the results are less stable. So this is something where we want to go next to try to check the robustness of our results and somehow include the larger Polish territories, so not just these 120 counties. And what we also test, we take into account, we try different models which would account for the spatial correlation that exists between these different counties. And that brings me to the conclusions. It's 2:00. So I think I already previewed the results. So we think that this large influx of Ukrainian refugees in the aftermath of the Russian-Ukrainian war brought polarization in votings in 2023. Whether this is a long-term or a short-term effect, something which we cannot say. And I think in the next steps, you want to spend more time on trying to make the results to see whether we can do something with the rest of the data for Poland, and to explore more different heterogeneities by different county compositions. Okay, so that's me. So I'm in Anna's office if you want to chat to me, and you can also always send me.
Thank you very much for the presentation.
Thank you.
Anyone would like to answer that? No, otherwise you can ask it anytime, because you will stay with us until January, right?
Yes. So maybe next couple of weeks I have some other commitments, but I will be here and I know Christmas is coming. So I heard from Anna it's not a popular time to be at the Institute, but in January, yes, so I'll be here. Thank you.
Thank you.